How do you do? I'm Maxim's wife.
How do you do? Well, I must say you're quite different from what I expected.
Oh, but Cecilia, she's exactly what I told you she'd be. Well, how do you like Mandela?
Very beautiful, isn't it?
And how do you get along with Mrs. Danvers?
Well, I've never met anyone quite like her before.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Luca Rossettini, CEO and co-founder of InOrbit. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here and an honor to be part of this. Thank you.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background and then how you eventually launched InOrbit some 10 years ago?
Yeah, sure. So my background is very technical. So like a degree in space engineering, Ph.D. in advanced space propulsion, several other masters in robotics, software, and even strategic sustainability and a certificate in business. And the reason why I have all these pieces of papers is because my life goal was to become an astronaut. So you need a lot of scores, right, to get there. I also joined the army for a while as an airborne officer. And when the astronaut contest came out in Europe, you have basically one chance in a life to become an astronaut. And usually there are like 10,000 applicants for positions. So, and as you can imagine, I went through the selection, but I'm not an astronaut, so something happened in between. But actually, the reason why they decide that at the very last phase of the selection, I was not suitable to become an astronaut, gave me the motivation to start InOrbit, to get there, right? To make sure that everybody can get to space, to facilitate and enable access to space for everybody. In 2008, when I participated to the astronaut contest, I had already 2 companies. One was producing drones. At that time, drones were not cool as today, so it was quite an innovative business at that time. And the other business was a lot of fun. We were producing special effects for the movie sector. So we also went to the Oscar. We didn't win, but it was really a cool experience. So in 2009, I went to Silicon Valley. I studied business there. I joined NASA for a while, where I met Renato, the other founder of InOrbit. And then at that point was 2010, we understood that the market in space was going to change soon. And we came back to Europe to found InOrbit.
It's a really fascinating story because I think many founders within the space category, they certainly have some proximity to space, but I think yours is probably the closest in terms of your aspiration to be an astronaut. Now, going back to kind of that 2008 timeframe or so, is space at that time, in terms of the economy, was very different, right? In terms of readiness, I think we weren't quite there in terms of the tipping point around CubeSats and nanosats. So I wonder how you as a company had to evolve over time to get to where you are today.
Yeah, it was like 2011 when we started the company. I mean, the word new space was not even in the dictionary. So, when we were talking about our vision, so space logistics, small satellites, space debris, interplanetary transportation, even the experts from the sector, they were suggesting us politely to go back to school and study, right? So they were considering science fiction what we were proposing. And by the way, what we are doing now, it was the science fiction that they were, considering at that time. So it was really, really hard. And especially deciding to go back to Europe, where also the financial market was not ready at all, right? So there were not investors in the space sector, and even in the technology sectors, there were like early stage funds. So it was really hard. I had to, use similarities. So I was selling the orbit as similar to pharmaceutical companies, biotech, clean tech, even semiconductors. So pharmaceutical, because you need a lot of capital at the beginning, and then you need to wait, and then you get like incredible high return at the end, right? So, but it didn't work very well. So it was really, really hard to raise capital. So what we have to do was to divide, so starting from the vision and then divide in markets rather than in technologies. That was the only way, and to find and to start in a market that was not touched by any other space company. And space companies at that time means giants, large corporations. So we identified the space debris as a starting point in which we could develop the base of our technology that we are still using, and that allow us to start making some money at the beginning. You know, in the early stage of the company, if you walked in our company and you liked my chair, you could buy the chair, right? So we were really ready to work with anyone, with large corporations. My first contract in the orbit was a $5,000 contract, but that contract enable us, to start working more and more with these corporations and so on. So it was hard, but it also is the base of what we are today. So understanding that you need to talk with customers first, understanding that you need to be resilient as much as possible. We learned the word resilience because of COVID, but we had to be resilient way far in the past. And also the way you approach the business. Make sure that whatever you do today, it's also something that you can sell today, but that you can sell also tomorrow in a new market. And be ready for the market shift, because the market is changing every day, and especially space that is growing exponentially. You need to understand when it's going to change.
So, from my point of view, I think the last 10 years of your team's journey is actually remarkably valuable, because unlike other tech-first oriented companies that tends to develop a product and look for market fit, you really had to hone in the ability to listen to your customers and offer services around it, really, and then over time build products from that services and experience set. To that end, really, you guys are hyper-focused around the entire life cycle of space missions, everything from the mission analysis, design, engineering, to manufacturing, integration, testing, and even end of life, like decommissioning. So can you talk about how some of these satellite manufacturers, data service providers, and others that are looking to launch satellites, how you're able to actually provide services and value to them, especially for those that, let's say, they don't have propulsion on their own satellites, for instance, and can reach the intended orbital slot?
Yeah, sure. Let me start with this first. So, when you are creating a new market, so there are two ways of making business. You improve the existing technology solutions, or you create a new one. At the business school, they teach you should focus on customers' need, right? We focus on customers' problems that they don't know they have. And that's how you create a new market. So before us, the business as usual was to use a rocket, go in the orbits in which you can go, and only those orbits, on only those locations in space, and that's it. And no one was really worried about, I cannot have access to other locations in space. That was as it was. So, but when you open the door to the possibilities of traveling into different planes, orbital planes, different locations, then customers start coming back to you, say, oh, wow, I can optimize my business. I can use more satellites here, less satellites there. I can reduce the size of the satellite. I can do more stuff, right? So it's amazing. So, and this is what we like. So we like to pioneer and to become enabler. So the space logistics is an enabler infrastructure. And the way it works is that once the rocket delivers our cargo satellite in orbit, we have on board our satellites, the satellites from our customers. Then we travel as the post office truck. We travel from, let's say, Boston, New York, San Francisco, and we deploy the packages, the satellites, exactly where they need to be in the least time possible. And time means a lot for satellite operators today, especially because satellites are not long-lasting in space, as in the past era in space. So this is how it works. We can save up to 85% time from launch to revenues and 40% of the overall cost of launching the constellation of satellites. And we operate not just CubeSats, but also satellites of any, let's say, shape and size, up to the current cargo can transport about 450 pounds in orbit, 200 kilos. And so any shape you have or any satellite you have that fits inside can be transported successfully in the right location.
So again, I think for those that are listening, a lot of the value segments that you're talking about, the entire value chain, these are really very difficult technical problems to solve, right? And I think for those listeners that are not as familiar, when you have launch services, they're not just, they can't just go up to any particular orbital location. There's a certain general region that they take the payloads to, but then as you have, increase in density from thousands to tens of thousands to eventually hundreds of thousands of these satellites, you have to have a certain constellation that makes sense. And that's where the movement of the last mile comes in, just like in the case of, let's say, Amazon or UPS trucks, for example, on the ground. So that's what we're talking about. And at the core of your offering and your IP is really the ION CubeSat carrier, right? That helps with the precise deployment for that full constellation. Can you tell us about your technology in terms of how that works? And not only in terms of propulsion, but I'm really curious in terms of the algorithmic projection in terms of the calculus to determine your speed and the projectile speed and where it's going to land in terms of relative orbital slot.
You may also like our quarterly Astro Perkins event that brings some of the most notable experts and category-leading startups in their area of sustainability and human survival on Earth and in space. To register, visit astroperkins.com/events.
Yeah. So we work in pretty much in the same way as for the logistics company that you mentioned before on ground, right? So you have customers that call you and they ask you, okay, I have this package and this package need to be delivered in that location in that particular day. And then you have different customers or different packages from the same customer, and then you have to optimize the trip from A to B to C to D and so on. So we develop all the tools internally. So not just the hardware, because the hardware is just one portion of the story here. So we develop the technology in-house from the electronic board to the full satellite, but the tools that you need to have in order to optimize the trip in space and to optimize the time required to go from A to B to C and to D were also developed internally. So let's assume that you have this tool that is running and is telling you what are the type of maneuvers that you need to perform in space. Then there are other aspects. So you want to make sure that your maneuvers are done, take into consideration the power you have, the propellant that you have, and the where is the Earth, where is the Sun. There are several other variables. So I'm not entering too much in technical details, but so you have to consider many different variables. When you're driving a truck, you have only a few variables. In space, you have a lot. Once you to consider that, and for example, you need to go from one orbital plane, so one orbit, into another one. Then you have different strategies. It really depends on the latitude in which the cargo is. So if you are in the higher latitude, I use latitude because I think everybody understands that. So in space it's a different terminology, but it makes sense. So when you are at a higher latitude, what you want to do is change inclination and then go back again in order to move at the same, let's say, latitude, but in a different plane. And this may take a while. So you need to have propulsion that allow you to move very fast in order to reduce the time. Or if you are at a lower latitude, what you do, you change the altitude. So you move far away or like more closer to Earth, and then you go back again in order to accomplish to the same goal. And this is how you move in space. So it's probably if there are space engineers now listening to us, they would kill me to have simplified so much. But definitely, it's a good way to understand how it works, the movement in space.
Yep. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Now, let's talk about contingency. So it's one thing to model and forecast that out in terms of the different maneuvers, but there's always going to be some variable that it's either not quite accounted for, or maybe once it's in operation, it's a little bit different than what was calculated. So how do you account for contingency and making sure there's a buffer? Especially around propellants, for example?
Yeah, so let's say, first of all, space is space. So it's, as you said, it's not just sending stuff into space, it's make sure then it's going to work properly in space. And the heritage, it's very important. But anyway, how can we make sure that our system can deliver to customers what they are expecting? Well, you need to work first of all on the quality. So this is something that in new space is not yet completely, real. The quality that the large corporations develop in the space sector in the last 60 years is definitely something that is very expensive. But if you use the quality procedures in the right way, you can find a way to apply good quality standards into a cheaper way. And this is what we were able to do. And this is thanks to, the initial, as I mentioned, when we had the first contract of $5,000, well, that helped a lot to understand how to work with quality. So you know that your technology, it's likely going to work, right? Then you go to space and you have a very good plan. You have all the contingency plans, and you have, you take care of all the potential, all the possible scenarios. And something that is not in that book happens, right? So how do you deal with that? Okay, if I spend 2 minutes more, I want to tell you a story that happens very recently. So we launched our cargo, and we use encryption in our communication, as it's pretty obvious. So everybody uses encryption. But for that specific day, the ground station provider had an issue on the encryption. So basically I said, okay, so we don't have to do any particular maneuver, so we can take away encryption for a limited amount of time, right? And we can perform the maneuver. So, but that launch came with a lot of satellites delivered in orbit. So there is a public organization that usually tracks satellites and provide you the TLE, so the reference that you understand where your satellite is. And they said, guys, there are too many satellites there. I'm not going to track you now. I will wait a few days. So our system are designed to be always the guilty ones. So if they don't receive signal, they think to be wrong, and they basically reset to the original state. So since it took more than 1 day to send the signal, because no one was tracking and so on, our radios reset and went to the encrypted mode. But we couldn't use the ground station to send the signal, right? So, and that was a very stupid thing, but we couldn't control the satellite. So we knew that the satellite was okay because we could receive the signal, but we couldn't respond. And this is actually another very interesting fact about the new space ecosystem, and that everybody is willing to help each other, and that's very good. So we contacted two entities that they have big antennas, and we contacted the ITU, and because of course you need the frequency license, to use a different antenna and so on. So all this mess that came up, and we asked them, look, this is the signal that you need to send, so the message. So please shoot the message, and they shoot the message. They unlocked the radio. Then we went back to the station. So it took a couple of days to fix the problem, but still, imagine the panic. And also, of course, you have a business to do that. So even if you are prepared, even if you take into consideration everything, you will not be able to control all the variables. And that's space. So space is really taking care of the risks.
I love that story so much. It really just demonstrated in a very crystal fashion. And by the way, for those that are listening, the orbit actually has made some significant milestones. So let me just kind of recap that a little bit. I believe last year you guys had demonstrated its last mile delivery service with the 12 planet super dove Earth imaging satellites. And then last month, again, this is recording as of early June, ION had deployed 20 satellites during its second mission and perform maneuvers, proving that it could change its altitude and inclination. And then this month, you guys are scheduled to have your largest mission with 6 distinct orbits, and to host 3 satellites on board during the third mission of the InOrbit NOW satellite. And I believe there's 11 nations that's involved in terms of the various companies, organizations from Spain, Kuwait, Finland to UAE, and many others. Can you tell us a little bit more about the upcoming mission?
Yeah, sure. That's as you mentioned, it's really a very interesting mission. We have on board companies from 11 different countries, and not just satellites. And this is actually a good excuse to introduce the second life of our cargo. So because we don't just deliver satellites in orbit, in the same way as DHL or FedEx are not just transporting packages, right? So the logistics is way more than just transportation. In fact, most of the payloads that we have on board are coming from different companies that they have new technology that they want to test in space. Usually today, if you are an early stage company, you got some money from an investor to develop your technology. Then you develop the technology, then you go back to the investor, say, okay, now give me more money because I need to go to market. And the investor say, okay, show me that your technology is working first. But in space, how do? You need to get to space. And to get to space, it takes between 2 and 5 years and $2 to $6 million. In the orbit, in like 6 months, you are done, right? So, and you don't pay, you pay a monthly fee, and your technology is tested in orbit. So we are going to test very interesting equipment. And usually how it works, we select the payload, in this case, that we want to integrate in the future in our cargo. So we help the companies, and they are our customers, but then we will become their customers if their technology will work properly. We already did it in the past with the motor and other equipment. And in June, we are going to test a data center in orbit. We developed, together with other companies, AI edge computing system. And we are going to test this in a data center to provide this service as a cloud-based service in orbit for satellite operators. That is a real cool thing if you think about, because you can maximize what you can do with satellites in orbit. So satellites are, collecting an enormous amount of data, but only like a negligible amount it's used to deliver services on ground. In that case, you can do whatever you want. And this is going to change the way you will make business in space. And that's real, if it works, of course. So, and this is a big portion of the next mission. And of course, it will be all the other customers that we are going to transport. This will be very challenging, several maneuvers, different planes. But I have to say that most of the customers are also returning customers. So they already tested us in the past. They are happy and they are coming back. And that's, what every business would like to see, returning customers.
Well, I'm so excited about some of these developments. I mean, we're talking about the development of the new space economy infrastructure. So the notion of a cloud infrastructure in space, edge computing capabilities, I mean, these are absolutely critical. So, whether we're talking about space stations, that's going to be private commercial space stations, as well as the lunar and the terraforming aspects there. Key aspects are going to be computing, storage, analytics, and of course the communication aspect. So, I'm very excited about what you guys are doing, and even more kind of esoteric. There's also other experiments that you guys are doing as well. I believe some things that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, as well as some art-related things, and things for the Italy's National Institute for Astrophysics as well. I want to go back to something that you said before, which is it's not just the hardware. I think there's a lot of capabilities that you guys have built over time. And part of that is a product I believe is called Aurora, which really is used to control the missions and to operate the payloads. Can you talk about that particular stack?
Don't forget to visit astroperkins.com to register for our next quarterly events. Past and current speakers include Damian Vaughn, former NFL player, Neil Gregory, Chief Thought Leadership Officer at the IFC World Bank, and many more. To register, visit astroperkins.com and click on Events.
Yeah, so we developed Aurora initially because we needed, let's say, something to control our fleet in orbit, right? So at the very beginning, we tried to have this done by a third party. But as I mentioned, so our first launch was in 2013. So even at that time, new space was not existing. So we went to a very well-known large corporations that was offering this type of services, but likely they didn't believe us, right? So they made a quote that was basically half of the value of the company. So I said, well, we produce hardware, we produce software, we will develop our own tool. And then customers start seeing that tool and say, oh, can we use it as well? And so we said, oh, wow, that's cool. So maybe we can develop this tool in a way that does not require any customization. So every customer can use it straight away. And then maybe we can develop this tool in a way that doesn't matter how many ground stations, antennas on the ground, and doesn't matter which type of communication protocol they are going to use. The customer can select the ground stations that they want. And maybe we can do more than that, because if we really want to control our let's say, fleet in orbit, then we will need advanced tools, advanced software, advanced applications. And I don't want to be the only one that developing those applications. There are very smart talents out there that can create way better applications that I can do with my team. That is, that's a lot to focus on. So Aurora, it's a mission control center software that allow you to pick any ground station that is available in the network, that you can that can control any number of satellites. I mean, infinite is not a number, but let's say a very large number of satellites, even if the satellites are different from each other, and customers can customize their own. They can send a description of their satellites, and the Aurora will process it automatically. But especially what is going to happen, and this is a preview of what is going to happen in a few months from now, you will have the possibility also for people that are not in the space sector, but they invented a very nice application that can work in space as well, or can work on the data from satellites, to develop applications using the API of Aurora that will basically use this. It's not a real marketplace, but it's a sort of, and everybody can use those applications to improve the management of satellites or the management of data and so on. So this is Aurora. It's really the core of whatever we are doing in space today.
That last comment that you made is quite interesting. It makes me think about some of the strategies that the larger tech companies have employed, where they have their core sets of product portfolio, but they're allowing for other third parties to hook in and enhance capabilities while still maintaining, of course, that security, privacy, and the integrity of the overall system. Let's talk about the sustainability in space in terms of, I think getting things into, let's say, the right orbital slot, or performing the payload objectives and goals is one thing, but there's a lot of opportunities around just servicing, right? Whether it's refueling, whether it's decommissioning, repositioning things. Talk to us about some of those opportunities.
Yeah. So when we started the orbit, we designed the orbit with the DNA of becoming like an enable. So we want to enable the space ecosystem to become a circular space economy, right? So since the very beginning, and this is what we use to drive all the decisions that we made in the past and that we are making today. So now we are at the point in which space is becoming really, really crowded, too crowded, and this is creating a lot of issues. And it has also some implications for business as well. So economic damage, economic losses, and we are not really, so we are creating complexity to solve a complex problem that create more complexity, and that again more complex problem, while we believe that there are simple procedures making sure that whatever you launch in space is removed immediately, not in 25 years, not in 10, immediately if it's not useful anymore. And for everything that is already there, go after that and remove it. And to remove it, I don't mean let's bring it back to Earth and let it burn into the atmosphere, because we are wasting very good material that, you know, I really like the concept of graveyard orbit. It was invented like in the 70s, right? So why don't park defunct satellites into these orbits until we will have the technology to recycle them in orbit? We will have raw materials. That's why in-orbit servicing is very important. You need to understand how to grab a satellite, to move it to one side, and so on. And we can use that raw material to produce new satellites in orbit. And it's also quite logical. We don't build boats on the desert and move them into the water. We build boats directly on the water. So why should we build satellites on Earth if we need to use them in space? I mean, today we have no possibility, right? But in the future, this is something that is definitely going to happen. And again, the infrastructure that will enable this to happen is I like to call it space logistics. And you mentioned in-orbit servicing, there is a part of it. And this is the evolution of the current activities that we are doing. Once you are able to do that, you can optimize the business of satellite operators, extending the life of the satellites, moving them where they are most needed, even to explore new markets, and making sure that at the end of life, they are not creating an issue for the same customer within the same constellations, or creating a damage to the entire space ecosystem, becoming a natural, let's say, natural resource for the future orbital manufacturing. And this is the basis for the interplanetary transportation infrastructure that is part of our vision.
I mean, there's a lot there to cover. So on Earth right now, as we speak, we're having a semiconductor shortage because of, I think, kind of misplanning in terms of expected market demand versus the capacity that was geared for. And even then, I mean, and again, this is on Earth. We have access to raw materials. We can easily, assemble these components into systems. In space, it's a completely different matter. And of course, the other gating factor is every time you put a new payload up in space, it's an exorbitant amount of cost, even though that cost is dropping significantly. So the notion of recycling in space, 3D printing, maybe even completely getting back down to this kind of metal alloy type of form factor are really valuable. Now, it does raise some questions as well, right? Well, first of all, I think from both policy and best practices, we're starting to see satellite companies or manufacturers planning for decommissioning so that whether it's passive or active, they're declining in orbit so that over time it comes down and it burns up. So that's one. But then there are also these legacy satellites. They don't have the capability to do that. So something is to actually physically move them into the right place. You call it essentially a landfill or recycling lot, let's say, which is fascinating. But the question, I think it's kind of twofold. One is, So even if you place it into kind of a specified area for that purpose, what's the potential of, keeping it there? What are other type of debris that could maybe almost like a playing billiards, where it moves some of those objects out and creates further kind of collision and debris issues, right? And then really is the best thing to do is just kind of place it, or do we need to house it? So that's another matter as well. And then my last question, I know it's a little bit convoluted, are aside from the physical whole satellites, there are pieces, there are debris, and that may be actually probably the most tricky things to remove from the orbit. So any thoughts on how you guys are planning to tackle some of these things?
Yeah, that's very, very good questions. And especially the second one is very technical, but it's very interesting question. So first of all, of course, you need to define safe areas. So we have already a graveyard orbit in space that is far away. It's above the geostationary orbit, so more than 36,000 kilometers far from Earth, and it's working pretty well. Okay, it's not very crowded, but still, I mean, we have to think that space is very big anyway. So when you define an area and you make sure that whatever you put in that area stays there, that's going to work very well. It works pretty much like here on Earth. You have some areas that that you cannot build roads, or you have to travel around that, and this is going to happen in space. Now, like a very trendy wording is space traffic management, right? So this is what we are talking about. There is the risk anyway that some of these satellites could explode. So, but there are already very strict regulations about that. So when you design a satellite, you need to make sure that whatever happens at the end of life, you passivate the satellite. So you make sure that it's not going to explode. So all the tanks with propellant have to be depleted. The electronics should be shut down. All these kind of activities that reduce this risk. But on the other hand, you have the market value. And I do believe that since the space market is global, markets are going to drive sustainability behavior and regulations. Because if a satellite operator see an economic benefit on removing properly their own satellites at the end of life, making sure that they are not creating any debris, because otherwise they will put at stake all the other satellites or their own constellations, or they need to consume fuel to avoid the collisions. This is going to incentivize to produce new technologies. So technologies always come after new technologies, new solutions, and the regulatory body will see what's going on and will put this within a framework that is going to work. So this is what I think is going to happen. We are not there yet. To be fairly transparent, space is still, how do you say, a new territory, right? So it's like the conquistadores. So whoever get to space, it's almost entitled to do whatever they want. But there are already a lot of very good satellite operators applying even stricter measures with respect to what regulations are asking for. For example, in our contracts, we ask our customers, when they sign the contract, they should have a mitigation plan for space debris. It's a drop in the ocean, but the ocean is made of drops. So if everybody working in the space will put their own drops, this is going to work.
Well, I wish we had more time. We're out of time. We didn't get to cover Mars or other kind of more interesting esoteric topics like space terrorism. But I have been joined by Dr. Luca Rossettini, who is the CEO and co-founder of InOrbit. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.